feature presentation.
Started watching Bottoms, now we're here. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another Untitled movie review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, are you saying that we bottoms out already? Like we're done? We're at the
Man, I just did my TIFF redemption. Speaking of Emma
Seligman.
Seligman.
Yeah.
We loved her last film at TIFF a couple years ago, which Eric's going to grab right now if anyone's watching the video version. Shiva Baby. Quite the surprise at TIFF during the pandemic. I think it was like the first film we saw during the fest, and it was when I was living in beautiful Blu-ray Eric just pulled out. Great movie.
Yep.
Everyone should go check that out. But today we are reviewing her new film, Bottoms, which is now playing in cinemas everywhere. Eric, how are you?
Matt, I'm stressed. You know, as we're recording this, school is about to begin for a lot of people, so that is also a good time to talk about Emma Seligman's slugfest of a sophomore effort, which is co-written by her muse, her lead, Rachel Sennott, who was also the lead in Shiva Baby. But in terms of the TIFF redemption window, you know, everything that's kind of being prepared beforehand, we will be reviewing a lot of TIFF movies. We've already seen about 8 or 9 of them. So, you know, we're thinking well ahead that way and also trying to have everything kind of prepared. But like last year, there were some snafus here and there, and you have to kind of pivot when it comes to those windows. And I think, you know, you're always reminded a little bit that nothing goes to plan.
Yeah, which is fine. I mean, if people are longtime listeners or viewers, you
who are you, first of all?
Last year we had to stop an episode in the middle of it so we could do our redemption, and then everything went to hell, but it ended up working out. Eric has his redemption coming up soon. I have I just did mine. You know, but we'll get to all that. We're going to be reviewing a ton of TIFF films, so keep an eye out on this channel. You'll see we're going to try to keep everything short in capsule review form. I say we'll try, but like that means 15, 20 minutes or lower, hopefully, on these TIFF reviews, especially because we'll have a lot of them coming out over the next month, probably, or at least a couple weeks. But forget all that. We're reviewing a movie that you can see right now. You don't have to go to a film festival. You can just go to your local cinema. If you want TIFF content, go watch our preview show after this. Go watch all those reviews or listen to them. We also have a episode of the Untitled Movie Podcast where we talk about our experience at Fan Expo as well, so you can check that out. But like we said, this is Bottoms time. Eric, I'll kick it over to you. What did you think of Bottoms?
You know what? I liked it. And I think there's a lot there to admire, especially how Emma Seligman and Rachel Sennott embrace the absurdist tone of the spoof parody movie set within the high school sort of scene, and how it's kind of playing up the ideas of the high school melodrama or parody that we've seen before, whether it be Not Another Teen Movie or even the Scary Movies, something like that, where there's this kind of artificial surreal quality that's not really, you know, the real world per se, but there are elements where it is very self-aware in what it's referencing. What's most fascinating about that is that the film itself isn't directly referencing anything from the last decade or so, like a lot of those parody movies do, where it's almost just taking kind of the general sort of broader strokes of
the kind of
genre.
Remember This.
Yes, exactly. Or, you know, the echoes of like having characters talking on, you know, the bleachers or the rafters during a practice football game is very familiar in the way that we see like in, you know, 10 Things I Hate About You or something like that, where it's like you see these locations that you're familiar with in past movies that are playing it more sort of straight. This is a very queer, very funny movie at times. And then there are other moments where it's confronting serious topics, and it's really wonderful to see a movie like this actually address some of those things, because you don't see that often in spoof movies. But at the same time, even though it's sincere, I almost feel that sort of detail or emotional depth that it's kind of evoking, especially in this safe circle sequence in the film, kind of falls a little bit flat when it's coming to filling the character development and the arcs of these people, outside of them just being stereotypes or caricatures or something like that. You really are coming for the performances. It's not necessarily Josie or PJ are great characters played by Sennott and Iowa Edebiri. It's more so you're coming for them, and what they're doing as actors and what they're doing as comedic actors.
Comedians.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I liked the movie, didn't love it, and this is coming off of absolutely adoring Shiva Baby, and obviously much different movies. Shiva Baby also very funny, but playing within this horror comedy, socio comedy like kind of thing, and playing on anxieties and social anxieties and things like that. I think you bring up a really great point. I always said that, or I tweeted this out after I saw the movie, that I felt like this was the love child of Not Another Teen Movie and the fight sequence from Anchorman specifically, just because there's the absurdity from that fight sequence throughout all the kind of fighting throughout the Fight Club, and especially in the last act of this film. And then there's just that Not Another Teen Movie vibe, everything from the football players reminding me of Chris Evans' character, and just like the whole vibe of the movie felt like Not Another Teen Movie. And yes, it's not specifically referencing other teen movies. It's almost just referencing the genre, as I'm pronouncing all this stuff weirdly. I don't know why. Sorry, everyone. I had to redeem my TIFF package, so my brain's melted. But it's referencing the genre as a whole, and I think that's kind of interesting. I agree with you that it's at odds with itself sometimes, where it is trying to tackle kind of some more serious subject matter, and I think that that's kind of undercut by the tone of the movie, where I'm glad it's also bringing that stuff up, and it does feel like a jarring kind of juxtaposition to the vibe of the rest of the movie, so it is impactful in those moments when it's brought up, but it does feel like it's out of a different movie at time. And I don't necessarily think that there are messages throughout this movie, or there's things that it's satirizing, but like that moment specifically that we're talking about in that share circle did feel kind of jarring. But I'm still glad that they put it in there. I just don't know if it um because of the kind of very over the top, surreal, not reality vibe, when you drop some really heavy, real shit in sequences like that, I do feel like sometimes it's undercut by some of the humor. The movie is funny. I just think it maybe wears thin a little bit. Like it's a tad one note. And that doesn't mean like, Not Another Teen Movie I'm nostalgic for, and I'm sure people will be nostalgic for this. And those references are a cheap way in those movies of being like, remember this sequence from this movie, and we're just kind of putting a funny spin on this, where this needs to be a little bit more clever with its humor, of satirizing high school, Gen Z culture, as well as the movies that we're talking about, high school movies, sex comedies. Like, it did remind me of all those kind of sex comedies we got in the 2000s, right? You can tell that Seligman's like kind of our age, right? Like it does feel like she's also nostalgic for the American Pies, the Not Another Teen movies, like all those, I'm going from my very male view of this, of those are the sex comedies that I liked back then, but I still think you see elements of those in this. I love Rachel Sennott. I love Ao Edebiri. She's popping up in everything lately. She's fantastic in The Bear. If you haven't watched that, I love seeing her have a little bit more of a lead role. She always kind of shows up in kind of ensembles or supporting stuff. And while I am starting to realize, like, okay, she does feel like almost the same character in everything that I've seen her in, I still find her just so charming and enjoyable to kind of watch. So yeah, I was kind of all over the place with this movie. Like I started off going, oh, this is really funny. And then as it kind of went on, I'm like, all right, I think I kind of get it. And I'm not laughing as much as it goes on. And, Eric, you and I have always talked about that comedies are the hardest things to review, I think, because everyone has a different sense of humor. So I think this is another one of those movies that I think if you've seen the trailer and you really liked the trailer, you'll vibe with the humor throughout the movie. If you watched it and goes, this movie has a weird tone and I don't know if I vibe with it, I feel like that you're not going to change your mind. Like you'll laugh at a few things here and there. Um, but it really does have this kind of, you said spoof movie, and it does kind of have that sort of vibe, even though it's not spoofing anything specific, like specific movies or anything. So I don't know. I enjoyed it. Didn't love it. I think even at 88 minutes, like about halfway through, I started to go, okay, I wish there was a little bit more to this, but it is funny at times.
Yeah, it commits to the bit, and I think the aspect of the elevator pitch being this is a female fight club, and that these two high school seniors basically come together and by almost just accident create this club because they want to hook up with these cheerleaders that they have
Yeah.
crushes on, and specifically within the high school parody movie, but high school films in general in from the 70s into the early 2000s, the LGBTQ plus character or characters in these stories are usually sidekicks or
Or
caricatures or
caricatures. Yeah.
tropes. They're always there to serve the heterosexual hero character and really have no life of their own. And I know that Emma Seligman's been talking about creating very complex and messy characters that are queer, that aren't simply just one thing or are simply innocent, as she said, or self-serving to another person. These two leads, these characters are a much more they're like any adolescent. They're dorks. They're doing something because they're at that age where puberty hits and adolescence and that horniness comes into play, and like it's being honest about that stuff, and it's just seeing it through a queer lens that I think also really helps break that mold a little bit when it comes to the genre as a whole. And when you look at a lot of these supporting players, they're often one note, and it is making a commentary on that. And I even think
That's
like
fair.
there's
Yeah.
some really good stuff when it comes to loneliness and divorce. Marshawn Lynch plays Mr. G, who's one of the worst teachers and laziest
Yeah.
allies you'll ever get. But it's interesting because his character is in the midst of a divorce, and then you also have Ruby Cruz's character Hazel, who's kind of almost like the Donnie to PJ and Josie's Walter and the Dude, in a way, where she's kind of like the smart one who always kind of comes in with like the organization of things, or knows what's really kind of going on, but is never kind of given the credit that she deserves. And she's kind of dealing with a single parent right now, and that loneliness and isolation of being a teen, and feeling that. So I think there's something interesting going on there when it comes to just, someone getting a divorce, or also, the opposite side of it, of just being a single kid and on their own with a single parent, and kind of trying to figure that out and the
Yeah.
complexities of it. And there's a lot of good stuff there. I just think that, like what you're saying, this almost feels like a short film that's been kind of stretched out a little bit to feature length. And even though it embraces the absurdity and the weirdness of the world in which it takes place, and it's not necessarily so over the top that you can't latch on to things. Like, it even references David Fincher when it says, we're starting a fight club, and it doesn't say Fight Club the movie per se, but it says, oh, I love David Fincher films. One of the characters says that. So it is meta in its commentary and how it's playing things up. But then also, what I do find funny about that like late 90s, early 2000s period, this is a movie that takes place in a modern era, but there are moments where you'll see a character on a flip phone and reading a phone book, or someone
Yeah.
listening to a Walkman, a CD
I think it's
Walkman.
supposed to be sort of out of time a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
and
Like
it
even with
throws
that
you
surreal
off.
nature. Yeah.
But I think the parts that don't work as well are some of the needle drops, especially when there are moments that are supposed to be kind of those big, bombastic kind of scenes where they really get you into the style of something maybe a little bit more grand, or the grandeur of it. Like, you hear Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart, which I'm grateful that it was Total Eclipse of the Heart, and not Holding Out for a Hero, as we've heard one too many times in
Did we get Avril
2023.
Lavigne
Yeah,
too?
complicated. And so,
Yeah.
like, again, talking about, Emma Sligman growing up in that period, that's that period perfectly encapsulated, and that style kind of encapsulated. And I do like the friendship between the two leads, because neither one of them is sidekicks to each other, or none of them, or neither one becomes the rom-com love interest. Like, the one I was
Yeah.
supposed to be with was right there in front of
Was
me.
actually you. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't follow those cliches. So, you know, is it a letdown compared to Shiva Baby, which kind of felt a little bit more controlled and focused, and the anxiety of being someone that is caught at a family function that's very familial but also still judgmental? It- It's not as much of a breakthrough or a revelation, but it's still worth your time. And Emma Seligman, I think, is
Yeah.
such a unique and singular filmmaker that anything she does is worth watching. And she's even talked about recently doing a horror movie next, and if she does, we're all screwed, because it'll probably
Yeah.
be one of the most disturbing things we'll ever watch. So yeah, it's a mild recommendation, but it's still one where it's like, you know what, I appreciate that she's creating something truly unique, and playing within a genre and world that we're familiar with, but seeing it from a different angle. And I think that that's the important part.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I would also give it kind of a soft recommend. Like, um, if you like I said, if you vibed with the trailer, go check it out. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I could probably say wait till streaming, but it is another one of those movies that comedies like horror are better with a big crowd. So, um, if this does have a big crowd and you can go see it right away, that might actually help your experience. So maybe don't wait until streaming, because I do find sometimes when I'll try to watch comedies alone, they just don't hit as well, especially something that's a little messy or a bit all over the place like this. But there are some laughs. Love the two leads. Um, the needle drops. I agree with you, Eric, that like I because it was that kind of out of time. Like I almost wanted this to be set in the 2000s or something like that. But I kind of like that it does have that kind of weird, like, when is this supposed to be? Throughout it. So yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna give the movie 3 out of 5. I think it's clearly like a decent watch. I'm not over the moon about it. I loved Shiva Baby. I don't know if I'll really revisit this, if I'll really think about it all that much. But it could possibly be one of those kind of cult movies for, people a little bit younger than us, for, like you said, the representation of queer characters and in the lead, and really focusing around them. There's like a lot of important good stuff in this, where it's still paying homage to those, probably slightly misogynistic and
Racist and
racist, and like,
stereotypical. Yeah.
so it is kind of taking, the good parts of those movies from the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and making something fresh and new for today's day and age. So I really appreciate it for that reason. And there probably will be a group of people that, much like some of those movies that I look back fondly to, even though they might be with rose-colored glasses on certain things that I haven't rewatched some of them in a long time. I think people will find this movie and have that same reaction. And I know she's compared it to like Wet Hot American Summer as well, which is a great comparison too. And we didn't bring up that like everyone seems a little too old to be in high school, which is like another funny bit that I always like in high school spoofs, is just like, maybe it's not as far as, certain things, because I do think that Rachel Sennott and Edebiri can play younger, but they still don't. No one clearly looks like they're in high school, which is kind of funny too. But
Yeah,
it's
well,
a 3 out of 5 for me.
it's like the classic Beverly Hills 90210 thing with, people like Jason Priestley and Luke Perry, who were people that were in their late 20s when they were playing high schoolers, or even movies or TV shows that aren't necessarily melodramatic or spoofs. Like you look at someone like Andrew Garfield in his Spider-Man
Oh,
films. In that
absolutely.
first film, he was nearing 30 when he was
I mean,
playing
Tobey
a high
Maguire
schooler.
looked like he was a grandpa in Spider-Man 3.
Yeah, so there's a commentary there, and it is reconciling with the genre in terms of like, you can still love those movies, but at the same time, there's a lot of problems there, and it is actually examining it in a very interesting way, and from a very specific point of view, and we're seeing the genre as a new, and I think another thing really maybe to mention here before we wrap up, it is extremely violent. I was kind of surprised with how not only the sound design, but the graphic detail of, the fist fighting and just the total, you know, disregard for the human body there is in this. Like it doesn't hold back, and it's actually quite funny, but still like you kind of wince at times as well. Like it's not as cartoonish as like a Naked Gun movie or even a Quentin Tarantino film where you feel completely desensitized to the violence. Like there are times where you do feel it in the punches or in the kicks or even just in
I think
the guttural visceral screams even,
once we get to that last sequence, which I keep comparing to the Anchorman kind of anchor fight, that's when I think it gets a little cartoony, but I do agree with you in the actual Fight Club.
Yeah.
Some of those sequences can be pretty brutal. I just think that last sequence when swords get, pulled out and things like that, where it's just like, or people get impaled and things like that, it gets a little goofy, but I see where you're coming from there.
Yeah, that last act reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if you ever saw the music video for Gob's "I Hear You Calling,"
Oh
where
yeah,
it's
yeah.
the
Of
band
course I
fighting
have. Come on.
zombie
Yes, on the
footballer
soccer field.
women's. Yeah, and
Yeah.
also, but then you have like something like Matthew Good's "Load Me Up," which also at the end takes place on a field, and it kind of almost has a music video kind of style to it in that last act. But there is a lot there, and there's a couple other movies as well that it feels like there is a certain amount of playing tribute to or homage with, Heathers with Winona Ryder and Christian
Yeah.
Slater, which is kind of, it's a little bit more dark and nasty with how it kind of plays this up, where it never Bottoms never treats its characters in a horrible manner. Like it treats everybody the way that they treat each other, and there
Yeah.
are moments where there are things where people are called out for being assholes, but it's not as disturbing at times as something like Heathers. And then there's another movie called But I'm a Cheerleader as well, with Clea Duvall and Natasha Lyonne, that also kind of feels like it takes place in a surreal world that's still somewhat recognizable, but isn't completely the world that we live in. And so that kind of stuff really works well in terms of like, if you're interested in these movies, check out this film as well. So I'm going to give Bottoms 3.5 out of 5. I think it's a solid film. I just think that there's something there that's kind of missing to really, punch it up a little bit more.
Cool. Well, thank you all for listening or watching. We really do appreciate it. As I mentioned, please go check out, we have an episode about Fan Expo over on the Untitled Movie Podcast. We probably talk a little bit about, TIFF coming up this week. So we've already done a big preview episode, which you guys can also check out on Untitled Movie Podcast. We'll probably talk about a few other things as well. You can check out all of our reviews for TIFF over on Untitled Movie Reviews. We'll have, oh my gosh, probably 20 to 30 reviews over the next couple weeks over on Untitled Movie Reviews. We'll try to keep them short so people can just kind of come in and out, especially because not everyone's going to have a chance to see these movies until much later. We also have reviews out right now for Gran Turismo and Ahsoka.
Gran Turismo.
So go check those out. And yeah, the next couple weeks are going to be busy. So
will we survive?
It's
Who
you'll
knows?
have to, yeah, probably not, but we'll see. I'm excited. TIFF's coming up. Stay tuned for all of that. For everything, head over to our letterbox, which is Untitled_movies, as well as follow me on all of those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene. There's an upcoming episode with guests Matt Rohrbeck and Shaq Lambert, which is going to be a fun one. We start off the conversation talking about the fall movie season, a little bit about the strike, but sadly it does devolve into a Saw conversation. So that will start airing on September the 10th. So I will post a link to it once it's available, but it's a lot of fun. Listening to Matt and Shaquille talk about the Saw franchises passionately as they do makes you almost think that movie franchise is worthy of reappraisal, but it's not. And
It
you can
is.
follow me on all the social medias at EM6211.
Until next time.
I'm gonna get a good copy of Divorced and Happy and just spend the rest of my day reading away reading.